A millionaire took in twin girls abandoned on his doorstep. Years later, when he found the basket containing the babies, he was shocked to discover the storm clawed at the windows of the Harper mansion with unrelenting fury, its howling winds rattling the glass panes and seeping through cracks in the old oak frames. Lightning flared, briefly illuminating the cavernous sitting room where Henry Harper sat alone. He nursed a glass of scotch, its amber glow a weak match against the tempest outside. The mansion, though grand with its ornate ceilings and gilded fixtures, felt hollow, a mausoleum filled with the echoes of a life he no longer lived. His gaze fell on the mantel above the fireplace, where a silver-framed photograph rested. Charlotte's face smiled back at him, frozen in a moment of warmth he could no longer touch. The soft morning light of their honeymoon in Florence captured her delicate features. He traced the rim of his glass with a calloused finger, the whiskey warming his throat, but failing to reach the cold ache lodged in his chest. "Charlotte," he murmured, barely audible over the storm, "what would you say about all this?" As if in response, a deafening crack of thunder shook the mansion, followed by the faintest, most unexpected sound, a knock at the door. Henry stiffened. He turned his head toward the entryway, the thick oak door barely visible down the dim corridor. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined it, a trick of his grief-laden mind. Then it came again, louder this time, sharp and insistent. Who in their right mind would venture out in weather like this? With a low groan, Henry rose from the armchair, instinctively reaching for the fireplace poker as he made his way through the shadowed halls of the mansion. The echoes of his footsteps on the marble floor filled the space, each one swallowed by the growl of the storm. Reaching the door, he hesitated. Rain hammered against the wood, and the faint whistle of wind found its way through the edges. His hand hovered over the latch, his pulse quickening. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but this felt off. Finally, he turned the handle, pulling the heavy door open against the storm's resistance. The wicker basket resting on the doorstep drew his attention as cold air and rain lashed at his face. He blinked, momentarily stunned. Lightning illuminated the scene, casting harsh shadows across the swaddled forms inside the basket. Two tiny faces peered up at him, eyes squeezed shut as they cried in shrill, desperate unison. Their fists flailed weakly from under the soft pink blankets. For a moment, Henry simply stared, his breath stolen by the absurdity of what he was seeing. The world around him blurred, the storm, the cold, the biting wind, all drowned out by the sheer impossibility of the moment. "Dear God," he whispered. Instinct took over. He crouched down, his hands trembling as he pulled the basket closer. The rain hadn't yet reached the infants, protected as they were under the basket's hood. Their cries intensified, high-pitched and piercing, cutting through his shock. "Shh, it's all right," he murmured, though the words felt foreign on his tongue. He reached out, hesitating only briefly, before lifting one of the babies. She was impossibly small, her face red and scrunched with distress, her tiny fingers clutching the air. He cradled her awkwardly, trying to shield her from the wind. All right," he muttered, half to himself, half to the squirming child. His gaze darted back to the other infant, still crying in the basket. "Let's get you both inside." He carried the basket into the foyer, kicking the door shut behind him. The warmth of the mansion immediately began to soothe the infants' cries, though their tears persisted in small, hiccuping gasps. Henry stood there, his clothes dripping onto the polished floor, unsure of what to do next. Who had left them here? Why? As the questions surged, Henry noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A silhouette standing at the far edge of his property, just beyond the wrought iron gate. The figure was still, unmoving against the storm, shrouded in darkness. A brief flash of lightning illuminated them, but by the time Henry blinked, the rain had swallowed the figure. A chill that had nothing to do with the storm crept over him. He shifted his gaze back to the infants, their tiny forms now quieter but still wriggling. A strange protectiveness stirred within him, mingling with his confusion and unease. He knelt beside the basket, running a hand through his wet hair as he stared at the two lives now thrust into his care. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The smaller of the two, her face a little less red now, let out a soft coo, her tiny hand grasping weakly at the air. Henry sighed, the weight of the moment sinking in. "All right," he said, softer this time. "We'll figure this out." He rose, lifting the basket with surprising care. Behind him, the storm raged on, but the mansion now held something it hadn't in years, a fragile spark of life, unfamiliar and fragile, but undeniably real. The Harper mansion had changed over the past 6 years. Once a quiet, somber place, steeped in shadows and memories, it now brimmed with the unmistakable sound of life. Laughter rang through the halls, punctuated by hurried footsteps and the occasional crash of something fragile. The once pristine walls bore faint smudges from tiny hands, and corners of the house had become shrines to childhood, stacks of colorful picture books, scattered toys, and half-finished craft projects. In the grand living room, Henry Harper sat at the polished piano, his fingers moving deliberately over the keys as he demonstrated a scale. Amber, perched on the bench beside him, mimicked his movements with wide-eyed concentration. Anna sat cross-legged on the plush rug nearby, her sketchbook balanced on her knees, furiously drawing a rendition of the piano. "Slow down, Amber," Henry said gently, his voice calm but firm. "It's not a race." Amber wrinkled her nose, but obediently slowed her pace. "But I want to play like you, Daddy." Henry smiled faintly, his gaze softening. "That takes time. You don't rush music. It's something you feel, like a heartbeat." Anna looked up from her sketch. "Does that mean I can't finish this drawing fast?" Henry chuckled. "That's different. You're not playing Chopin with a pencil." The girls giggled, the sound light and unburdened. For Henry, it was a melody in itself. He had long since stopped questioning how 2 lives left at his doorstep had so effortlessly filled the void he thought would remain forever. Later that evening, Henry tucked the girls into their shared bedroom after dinner and an impromptu puppet show that Amber and Anna orchestrated using mismatched socks. The space was a patchwork of their personalities. Amber's side, cluttered with stuffed animals and bright posters, while Anna's corner was tidier, adorned with neatly arranged sketches and books. "Daddy, tell us a story," Amber said, her hands clutching the edge of her blanket. "A new one," Anna added, her eyes gleaming with quiet anticipation. Henry sat on the edge of their bed, pretending to ponder. "A new one, huh? All right. Once upon a time, in a house much like this one, there lived 2 curious, mischievous princesses." As the tale unfolded, their eyes grew heavy, and soon soft breaths signaled their descent into sleep. Henry lingered for a moment, brushing a strand of hair from Amber's face and tucking the blanket snugly around Anna. He leaned down, kissed each forehead, and whispered, "Good night, my loves." The attic had always been Henry's least favorite part of the house, a dusty graveyard for things that no longer fit into everyday life. Yet, on this quiet Sunday afternoon, a loose hinge on a box of winter coats brought him upstairs. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of cedar clung to the forgotten furniture and trunks scattered about. He set the coat box aside and surveyed the attic, his eyes landing on a worn wicker basket tucked in the far corner. A wave of recognition passed through him. The basket. He crouched beside it, brushing off a thin layer of dust. Memories of that stormy night resurfaced, Amber's tiny fists waving, Anna's plaintive cries. They had been so small, so fragile. His fingers grazed the edge of the basket, and something metallic clinked faintly. Curious, he reached inside and pulled out the necklace he had nearly forgotten. He held it up, its delicate silver pendant catching the faint light streaming through the attic's lone window. The intricate swirls seemed almost alive, twisting and curling like smoke. He hadn't noticed it before, at the base of the pendant, a tiny latch. His brow furrowed as he examined it. With a soft click, the locket opened, revealing a faded photograph inside. Henry froze. His pulse quickened as he stared at the image. 4 familiar faces gazed back at him. Himself as a boy, his mother and father, and his younger sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth. The name sat heavy in his mind, a wound he had tried to ignore for years. She had left in anger, her voice echoing through the house as she stormed out with Martin, despite their parents' desperate pleas. He hadn't heard from her since. His hand shook slightly as he closed the locket and placed it on the basket. The coincidence was strikingly precise and uncanny. Why had the girls left this behind? Who had put it there, and why? For the first time in years, doubt clouded the certainty Henry had built around his life, with Amber and Anna. He stared at the basket, the locket, the photograph, as if they might whisper the answers he so desperately wanted. Downstairs, Amber and Anna's laughter filtered through the halls, grounding him in the present. Whatever mysteries the past held, one thing was clear. Those girls were his now. The rest, whatever it might mean, could wait. But as he carried the locket downstairs, he knew waiting would not come easily. Henry Harper was not a man prone to doubt. His decisions were usually firm, his path always clear. Yet, as he stood in the quiet kitchen that evening, the locket's weight in his palm felt heavier than its delicate size suggested. His mind churned, the photograph within its folds haunting him with possibilities he wasn't ready to face. The girls' laughter echoed faintly from the living room. They were playing a game of hide-and-seek, their giggles punctuated by shouts of "Found you!" and the sound of tiny feet pattering against the wooden floors. Henry placed the locket carefully in his pocket, steadying himself with a deep breath. This wasn't betrayal, he told himself. It was necessary. The next morning, Henry waited until the girls were at school before retrieving 2 of their used hairbrushes from the bathroom. His fingers lingered over the strands of hair caught in the bristles, a pang of guilt flickering through him. What would they think if they knew? At the clinic, the process was discreet. The lab technician barely looked at him as he handed over the samples, his explanation rehearsed and impersonal. Family history research. He hated the lie, but couldn't bring himself to admit the truth, not to a stranger, not even to himself. As he walked out into the crisp Boston air, the necklace's intricate design seemed to press against his chest, a physical reminder of the questions he'd set into motion. Back at home, the twins were quick to notice his distraction. Amber was the first to bring it up, her perceptive nature always sharper than her sister's. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked one evening as she perched on the counter while Henry prepared dinner. Henry glanced up from chopping vegetables, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" Amber tilted her head, her small fingers fiddling with the edge of her shirt. "You've been quiet. Not the regular kind, like when you read. The other kind." Henry set the knife down and turned toward her, wiping his hands on a towel. "The other kind?" he repeated, his voice soft. "The kind when you're thinking about something sad." Amber said simply, her eyes searching his face. Before he could respond, Anna bounded into the kitchen, brandishing a crumpled piece of paper. "Daddy, look what I drew," she exclaimed, thrusting the sketch toward him. It was a portrait of their family, herself, Amber, and Henry, with the house in the background. Henry crouched to her level, taking the drawing carefully. The stick figures were endearingly disproportionate, but the attention to detail was unmistakable. His graying hair, the girl's matching pigtails, the tiny flowers dotting the lawn. His throat tightened. "It's beautiful, Anna," he said, pulling her into a hug. Amber joined them, her arms wrapping around his back. For a moment, the weight of his suspicions lifted, replaced by the warmth of their embrace. The results arrived a few days later. The envelope sat on his desk, unassuming but potent, like a dormant storm. Henry stared at it for what felt like hours before finally breaking the seal. Inside was confirmation of what he had feared, and in a way, hoped. Amber and Anna were Elizabeth's daughters. The numbers were irrefutable, the science cold and exact. Henry leaned back in his chair, the paper trembling in his hands. His thoughts reeled, colliding in a chaotic spiral. Elizabeth. The name alone felt like a wound reopened. What had happened to her? Why had she left the twins at his door without a word? The questions gnawed at him, their weight suffocating. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He quickly folded the paper and tucked it into a drawer as Amber peeked her head in. "Daddy, we're building a fort in the living room. Want to help?" He forced a smile, though his chest still ached. "Of course. Lead the way." That evening, after the twins had fallen asleep beneath their makeshift fort of blankets and chairs, Henry sat alone in his study. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of its ancient bones. The locket lay open on his desk, the photograph staring back at him. Elizabeth's face was vibrant, full of life, a stark contrast to the hollow void she had left behind. Henry pressed his hands to his face, the burden of what he now knew settling heavily on his shoulders. He had promised himself years ago to protect Amber and Anna, to give them the life they deserved. That promise had not changed. But now, there was something more he owed them. The truth. Standing, he retrieved the locket and the folded test results. His resolve hardened. He was determined to discover Elizabeth's fate and the reasons behind leaving the twins in his care. The past would no longer linger unanswered, no matter how painful the answers might be. As he glanced toward the living room, where Amber and Anna lay peacefully in their fort, he whispered a silent vow. "I'll protect you, no matter what, and I'll find the truth, for all of us." Henry sat at his desk, the locket lying open before him, its delicate design a haunting reminder of the questions gnawing at his mind. He tucked the envelope containing the DNA test results into the same drawer as his ledger, keeping its damning confirmation out of sight, but never out of his mind. For days, he had tried to work through the puzzle alone, but the weight of it all had grown unbearable. He needed help. A discreet contact had recommended Arthur Sullivan as someone who could handle sensitive matters without stirring up trouble. Henry was hesitant at first. Private investigators had a reputation for prying too deeply, but this was not a task he could handle alone. Arthur arrived at the Harper mansion on a grey afternoon, his coat dripping from the persistent drizzle outside. He was a man of average height, with sharp, calculating eyes that missed little and a demeanor that balanced professionalism with a faint edge of skepticism. "Mr. Harper," Arthur said, extending a hand as Henry met him in the foyer. "I appreciate you inviting me into your home. It's rare I work with someone so established." His gaze flicked over the grand staircase and the fine art lining the walls, though his tone remained neutral. Henry shook his hand firmly. Thank you for coming. This is a matter that requires discretion." Arthur nodded, following Henry into the study. The investigator took in his surroundings with a quick, efficient glance. The polished oak shelves lined with leather-bound books, the neatly arranged desk with its single out-of-place item, the locket. After they took their seats, Henry pushed the locket across the desk in Arthur's direction. "This belonged to my sister Elizabeth. She left home almost 10 years ago. I need to know what happened to her." Arthur picked up the locket, turning it over in his hand. His brow furrowed at the photograph inside, but he said nothing, waiting for Henry to continue. "There are 2 girls," Henry said, his voice measured, though it cracked faintly at the edges. "Amber and Anna. I found them on my doorstep 6 years ago. I raised them as my own, but they're Elizabeth's daughters. The DNA test confirmed it." Arthur's gaze flicked back to Henry, his face unreadable. "Do you think locating Elizabeth will provide you with explanations for the children's abandonment?" Henry leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "I need to know if she's alive. I need to find out if she's alive. And if she's not," he hesitated, swallowing hard. "I need to know why this happened." Arthur studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Tell me everything you know about her, starting from the last time you saw her." As Henry recounted Elizabeth's departure, the words came slower, heavier. He described the fiery arguments, her stubborn insistence on leaving with Martin despite their parents' disapproval, and the suffocating silence that followed. "She was 22, Henry said, his voice low. "Young, idealistic, and convinced that Martin was the answer to all her problems. My parents begged her to stay, but she left that night and never came back." Arthur made a note, his pen scratching lightly against the notepad. "What do you know about Martin?" "Not much," Henry admitted. "He was older, charismatic. My parents hated him, said he was manipulative, interested only in Elizabeth because of our family's wealth." "And you?" Arthur asked, tilting his head slightly. Henry hesitated. "I thought they were being dramatic, but looking back, maybe they were right." Arthur nodded, leaning back in his chair. "It's a start. I'll need access to anything she left behind, letters, photographs, anything that might give us a lead." Henry gestured toward the locket. "That's all I have. The rest went with her." Arthur slipped the locket into his pocket and stood. "I'll begin with Martin. If she's alive, she might have answers. And if she's not..." His voice trailed off, leaving the implication unspoken. "I'll report back in a few days." That night, as the rain tapped softly against the study windows, Henry found himself staring at the empty chair across from his desk. Elizabeth's face swam in his mind, her laugh, her defiance, the way she always seemed to carry a spark of something unnameable. Anger warred with guilt. He had hated her for leaving, for tearing the family apart. But now, knowing she had been a mother, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of life she had lived. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Anna appeared in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice small. "Are you sad?" Henry managed to smile, opening his arms. She climbed onto his lap, resting her head against his chest. "I'm just thinking, sweetheart. That's all." Amber peeked around the corner, dragging her blanket behind her. "Me too," she said, climbing onto the chair beside him. As he held them close, their warmth grounding him, Henry whispered to himself, "Whatever I find, I'll protect you both. That's a promise." 3 weeks passed before Arthur Sullivan returned to the Harper mansion. The investigator stood in the doorway of Henry's study, his sharp features softened by the faint shadows cast by the late afternoon light. In his hand was a slim folder, worn at the edges, but brimming with answers Henry wasn't sure he wanted to hear. "Mr. Harper," Arthur began, his voice steady but tinged with gravity, "I've uncovered Elizabeth's story. I must warn you, it's not an effortless one." Henry gestured for him to sit. His pulse quickened as Arthur laid the folder on the desk between them. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "Tell me everything," Henry said, bracing himself. Arthur flipped open the folder. Inside were a few photographs, handwritten notes, and a death certificate. He picked up the letter, handing it to Henry. Elizabeth died shortly after birthing the twins. The cause of death was postpartum hemorrhage. It was sudden, and there was little the clinic she was in could do. Henry's breath caught, his hand trembling as he held the paper. The name Elizabeth Harper stared back at him, cold and final. "She's gone," he whispered, the words foreign and hollow in his mouth. "And I never knew." Arthur nodded solemnly. "She gave birth in a small, underfunded clinic in a rural area. She wasn't in contact with anyone from her family by then. The staff there remembered her as quiet but kind." Henry pressed his hand to his face, his mind reeling. The image of his fiery, defiant little sister, reduced to a fragile memory, was unbearable. "And Martin?" he asked, his voice sharp with anger. "Where was he during all this?" Arthur's expression darkened. "Martin was with her when the twins were born, but the clinic staff noticed something strange. He left almost immediately after Elizabeth passed, taking the girls with him. It appears that his mother was the one controlling the situation. She wanted nothing to do with the twins, but knew they were the Harper family's bloodline. It was her idea to abandon them here." Henry's grip tightened on the paper, his knuckles white. "They just left them at my door, like an inconvenience." "Yes," Arthur said quietly. "I found records of Martin and his mother discussing the plan. They assumed you would take them in because of your family's wealth and reputation." For a long moment, Henry said nothing. He stared at the desk, the edges of the death certificate blurring in his vision. His chest felt like it was caving in, crushed by the weight of what he had learned. He had done nothing to save Elizabeth, whose last moments were likely filled with fear and pain. "I failed her," Henry murmured, his voice breaking. "She was my sister, and I wasn't there for her." Arthur leaned forward, his tone firm, but not unkind. "You couldn't have known. And you've given those girls a life their mother would have wanted. That's something." But the words did little to ease Henry's guilt. He ran a hand through his graying hair, his mind racing. What about Martin now? Where is he? Arthur hesitated before answering. "That's where things get complicated. Martin's current whereabouts are unclear, but my sources tell me he's heard about the girls. He knows you've raised them, and he knows you care for them deeply." Henry's gaze snapped up. "What does he want?" "It's most likely money," Arthur said, his expression set in a grim line. "From what I've gathered, his financial situation is precarious. He may see the girls as leverage." A cold fury ignited in Henry's chest. "He abandoned them. He has no right to come near them now." "I agree," Arthur said. "However, I don't think Martin follows the rules. I'd advise you to be cautious. He could try something reckless." Henry stood abruptly, pacing the room. The idea of Martin, or anyone else, posing a threat to Amber and Anna stirred his emotions. Now, they were his daughters in every meaningful way, and he would not allow the man who had abandoned them to disrupt their lives. "Keep digging," Henry said, his voice steady despite the storm building within him. "Find Martin. I need to know exactly what he's planning." Arthur rose, gathering his things. "I'll update you as soon as I have more information. And Mr. Harper, if you need additional security for the girls, say the word." Henry nodded, his jaw tight. After Arthur left, he sank back into his chair, the weight of the day pressing heavily on his shoulders. He glanced at the photograph on his desk, the image of his family, before everything fell apart. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I was not present for you. However, I will avenge myself if I permit him to inflict harm on your daughters." Downstairs, the sound of the girls' laughter floated through the halls, a fragile reminder of what he stood to protect. Whatever Martin's intentions, Henry was ready. He would fight for Amber and Anna with everything he had. The past might have claimed Elizabeth, but it wouldn't take them too. We always have loved ones in our lives. So, when is the birthday of the person you love the most? Can you share it in the comment section with us? We will guess what kind of relationship that person has with you. The sharp rap of knuckles against the Harper mansion's front door echoed through the quiet halls. It was an unfamiliar knock, forceful, almost intrusive. Henry Harper set down his coffee cup, his brow furrowing as he crossed the marble-tiled foyer. The early morning sun poured through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the pristine floor. When Henry opened the door, the man standing on the stoop was a ghost from a past he'd hoped to leave buried. Martin. He looked older, the years etched into the deep lines of his face, but his eyes still held the same cold calculation Henry remembered from long ago. "Henry," Martin said with a faint smirk, his hands casually shoved into the pockets of a worn leather jacket. "Long time no see." Henry stiffened, his hand tightening on the edge of the door. "What are you doing here?" Martin's gaze flicked past him, taking in the opulence of the mansion with barely concealed envy. "We need to talk." Henry didn't move, his voice sharp. "About what?" Martin leaned against the doorframe, the smirk softening into something more serious. "About my daughters." The words landed like a blow. Henry's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside, allowing Martin to enter. The man strolled into the foyer, his boots leaving faint traces of dirt on the polished floor. Henry closed the door with a deliberate click, his mind racing as he followed Martin into the study. Martin surveyed the room with thinly veiled disdain, running a finger along the edge of the antique desk. Nice place. The girls must love it here. Better than where they started, that's for sure. "Get to the point," Henry said, his tone ice-cold. Martin turned to face him, his expression hardening. "I want them back." Henry stared at him, incredulous. "Excuse me." "They're my kids, Henry," Martin said, his voice rising. "I'm their father. You had no right to keep them." Henry took a step closer, his voice low but firm. "You abandoned them. You abandoned them on my doorstep as if they were insignificant. Don't stand here and talk to me about rights." Martin's eyes narrowed. "I had my reasons. Things were complicated back then. But I'm here now, and I want them back. Unless..." He trailed off, his lips curling into a sneer. "You'd prefer to settle this another way." "What are you implying?" Henry asked, his voice deadly calm. Martin shrugged, spreading his hands. "You're a rich man, Henry. I'm sure we can work something out. With a small payment, I can depart. You can continue to play the role of a happy family." Henry's fury simmered beneath the surface, his hands clenched at his sides. "You think you can waltz in here after 6 years and make demands? What have you and your mother done to Elizabeth? You're delusional." "Elizabeth," Martin scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. "She was always a mess. You think I owe you or her anything? I'm the one who..." Henry's voice pierced the room like a blade. "Enough. You will not speak about her that way." For a moment, the two men stared each other down, the tension thick and suffocating. Then Martin's smirk returned, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "You're protective, I'll give you that. but let's see how protective you are when things get messy." Henry stepped closer, his voice a low growl. "Get out of my house, and don't come near Amber and Anna again." Martin chuckled, brushing past him toward the door. "You think you've won, Henry. This isn't over. You'll hear from me soon." As the door slammed shut behind him, Henry stood in the foyer, his chest heaving. The anger coursing through him was unlike anything he'd felt before. He turned and looked up the grand staircase. Amber and Anna stood at the top, their small faces etched with confusion and concern. "Daddy," Amber called softly. Who was that man? Henry forced himself to take a steadying breath. "No one you need to worry about," he said, his voice gentler than he felt. "Come downstairs. Breakfast is ready." The girls hesitated, exchanging a glance before making their way down. As Henry ushered them into the dining room, his mind raced. Martin's veiled threat lingered like a dark cloud, a promise of trouble to come. He would have to prepare. For Amber and Anna's sake, he would be ready for whatever Martin planned. For now, he concentrated on their laughter while they conversed over pancakes, their innocence serving as a delicate barrier against the impending storm that lurked beyond the mansion's boundaries. Martin sat at the corner booth of a dimly lit bar, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. His fingers tapped impatiently on the sticky tabletop as his mind churned, trying to piece together a plan. His face, once smooth and charming, now bore the marks of a hard life. Deep lines around his mouth, shadows under his eyes. He swirled the amber liquid absently, his thoughts darting back to the encounter at the Harper mansion. He hated how easily Henry had dismissed him, how the man had stood there, resolute, as though he were untouchable. The mansion, the wealth, the pristine life, all of it grated on Martin. It wasn't fair. Those girls were his blood, his leverage. "Martin!" A gruff voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. A stocky man in a leather jacket slid into the seat across from him. Behind him, a wiry younger man lingered, his shifty eyes scanning the room. "You're late," Martin snapped, his irritation spilling over. The stocky man, Carl, shrugged, unbothered. "Traffic," he said flatly. "What's the job?" Martin leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It's a retrieval. 2 kids. Twins. 7 years old." Carl raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Kids? You sure about this?" "They're mine," Martin said, his tone defensive. "I just need to remind someone of that. They're guardians making things difficult." Carl exchanged a glance with the younger man, who cracked his gum and shrugged. "Sounds messy," Carl said finally, "but doable. You got a plan?" Martin hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Not yet. That's why I called you." Meanwhile, at the Harper mansion, Henry stood in the study, staring at the security plans laid out on his desk. He'd spent the past few days consulting with Arthur and hiring a team to upgrade the house's defenses. Cameras now covered every angle of the property, and motion sensor lights lined the perimeter. Henry had also discreetly briefed the staff on the situation, making sure they never left Amber and Anna unattended. His instincts told him Martin wouldn't give up easily. The man was desperate. His veiled threats at their last meeting were a clear indication of how far he was willing to go. Henry wouldn't take any chances. The girls were his responsibility, and he would protect them at all costs. In the living room, Amber and Anna were oblivious to the growing tension. They sprawled on the floor, meticulously building an elaborate fort from cushions and blankets. Amber's eyes gleamed with determination as she adjusted a precarious pillow tower, while Anna sketched a blueprint of their creation on a scrap of paper. "We need a secret escape tunnel," Amber declared, her tone serious. Anna nodded, tapping her pencil against her chin. "And keep an eye out. in case the undesirable guys come. Their game was innocent, but Henry, watching from the doorway, couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. Their playful scenarios felt too close to the danger lurking outside. "Daddy!" Amber called, catching sight of him. "Come help us with the fort!" Forcing a smile, Henry stepped into the room, kneeling beside them. "What's the plan, architects?" Amber launched into a detailed explanation, her hands gesturing animatedly, while Anna held up her sketch. Their enthusiasm was contagious, drawing Henry momentarily into their world. But the shadow of Martin's threat lingered in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of the reality he couldn't ignore. Back at the bar, Martin was outlining his plan. "The house is big, but I know the layout. There's a side entrance near the east wing. Staff use it. Less security there." "And the kids?" Carl asked, his tone skeptical. "They're not just going to come quietly." Martin's lips curled into a smirk. "They're kids. They'll listen, if you scare them enough." Carl frowned but said nothing. The younger man, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "What's the payout?" Martin's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Enough. Trust me." Carl studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. We'll need a van. Quiet driver, masks. Nothing fancy. And if this goes south, you're on your own." "It won't," Martin said confidently. But as he drained the last of his whiskey, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. He had to pull this off. Failure wasn't an option. That night, as Henry tucked the girls into bed, Amber reached for his hand. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Henry hesitated, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" "You've been different," she said simply. Anna chimed in, her voice quiet. "You seem worried." Henry leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from Amber's face. "It's my job to worry about you two, but you don't need to worry about me, okay? Everything's fine." They nodded, but Henry could tell they weren't entirely convinced. As he turned off the light and closed the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that their innocence was more fragile than ever. In a dingy garage on the outskirts of town, Martin stood beside a van, inspecting the supplies Carl had gathered. Masks, rope, duct tape, everything he needed for the job. The plan was set. Tomorrow night, they would strike. As Martin ran a hand over the van's cold metal exterior, his jaw clenched. This was his chance to reclaim control, to take back what he thought was his. The storm was coming. The Harper mansion stood silent under the cover of night, its sprawling grounds bathed in pale moonlight. The faint hum of cicadas filled the air, mingling with the occasional rustle of leaves in the soft breeze. Martin crouched behind the east wing, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the side entrance he'd scouted days before. Behind him, Carl and the wiry younger man, Eddie, stood ready, the tension between them palpable. "You sure about this?" Carl whispered, his tone laced with doubt. "The place looks locked down." Martin shot him a glare. "Just stick to the plan." With a nod, Eddie moved towards the door, his nimble fingers working quickly to disable the lock. Within seconds, it clicked open, and the three men slipped inside, their movements soundless against the polished floor. Upstairs, Amber stirred in her bed, the faint creak of a door somewhere in the house tugging her from sleep. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and glanced over at Anna, who was fast asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Something felt off. Amber slid out of bed and tiptoed to the door, peeking into the hallway. She strained her ears, catching the faint sound of footsteps below. Her heart quickened. Daddy had said not to worry, but this wasn't normal. She padded back to Anna, shaking her gently. "Anna," she whispered urgently. "Wake up." Anna groaned, rolling over. "What is it?" "I think someone's here," Amber said, her voice barely audible. Anna sat up, her eyes widening. "What do we do?" Amber's mind raced. "We hide, like in the fort game." Downstairs, Martin gestured for Carl to stay near the base of the staircase, while he and Eddie moved toward the living room. The girls' rooms were just above them, and the plan was simple. Get in, grab the kids, and get out before Henry even realized what was happening. Martin's lips curled into a grim smile as he pictured the look on Henry's face when he discovered his precious daughters were gone. Amber and Anna crouched in the back of their closet, their small hands clasped tightly together. Amber's mind flashed back to their fort game earlier that day. "We need a plan," she thought. Her eyes landed on Anna's sketchbook, half buried under a pile of toys. She grabbed it, whispering, "Anna, we need to leave clues." Anna frowned. "Clues? So Daddy knows where to find us," Amber explained, flipping to a blank page and scribbling as fast as she could. She drew a picture of the two of them with a van, arrows pointing toward the east wing. "Help me tear it out," she said, handing it to Anna. Anna hesitated but obeyed, carefully ripping the page from the book. Amber folded it and slipped it under the closet door. Martin reached the girls' room, pausing to glance over his shoulder. Eddie stood nearby, his expression tense. "Let's move," Martin hissed, pushing the door open. The room was dark, the soft glow of a nightlight illuminating the beds. Both were empty. Martin cursed under his breath. "Where are they?" Eddie gestured toward the closet. "Check in there." Martin yanked the door open, and Amber and Anna shrieked as the light from the hallway spilled over them. Martin reached in, grabbing Amber by the arm, while Eddie snatched up Anna. "Let go!" Amber yelled, kicking and writhing. "Quiet!" Martin barked, hauling her out of the closet. Anna's voice trembled as she clung to her stuffed rabbit. "Please don't hurt us!" Martin ignored her, dragging both girls toward the staircase. They struggled, their small bodies twisting and pulling against his grip, but he was too strong. Downstairs, Carl opened the side door, checking for any sign of movement outside. "Hurry it up," he growled, as Martin and Eddie descended with the girls. Amber twisted her head, catching sight of the piece of paper she and Anna had left behind. It peeked out just beneath the closet door, and her heart leapt. "Daddy will find it," she told herself, holding tightly to that hope. The men piled into the van, Martin sliding the door shut as Carl started the engine. The vehicle rumbled to life, disappearing down the long, winding driveway. Henry awoke with a start, the faint hum of the security system in his ear. Something was wrong. He sat up, his heart pounding as he scanned the room. The intercom system blinked, indicating movement near the east wing. Throwing on a robe, he rushed toward the girls' room, dread curling in his stomach. The door was ajar, the beds empty. His breath caught in his throat as he tore through the house, calling their names. When he found the scrap of paper on the floor, his knees buckled. The crude drawing was unmistakable. Amber and Anna in a van. He clutched the paper, his hands trembling, and grabbed his phone. "Arthur," he said, his voice shaking. "They've taken them." In the van, Amber and Anna huddled together, their small bodies pressed tightly against the cold metal wall. Amber whispered, "We'll be okay. Daddy will find us." Anna nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I left the rabbit," she said softly, her voice breaking. "He'll know." Amber squeezed her sister's hand, their shared determination cutting through the fear. They wouldn't let Martin win. Not without a fight. Back at the mansion, Henry paced the study as Arthur coordinated with the authorities. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity. "They'll regret this," Henry muttered under his breath, his jaw tight. "I'll make sure of it." Rain hammered against the rusted walls of the abandoned dockyard, each drop echoing like a warning. Thunder growled in the distance, and lightning cast brief, jagged shadows over the scene. The van screeched to a halt in front of a decrepit warehouse, its headlights cutting through the storm. Carl killed the engine, glancing warily at Martin, who sat in the passenger seat, a triumphant sneer tugging at his lips. "Here," Martin said, throwing open the door. "Let's get them inside." In the back, Amber and Anna huddled together, their hands intertwined. They shivered. Not just from the cold metal floor of the van, but from the fear coiled tightly in their chests. Yet beneath their terror, there was a spark of resolve. They exchanged a silent glance, Amber's eyes filled with determination, Anna's with quiet trust. Carl yanked the side door open, his bulk silhouetted against the rain. "Out!" he barked, motioning for the girls to move. Amber hesitated, gripping Anna's hand tightly. "We can't," she said, her voice small but steady. "Anna's hurt." Martin appeared beside Carl, his patience fraying. "What are you playing at?" he snapped, glaring at the twins. "She twisted her ankle," Amber said quickly, her free hand gesturing to Anna's foot. "She can't walk." Martin cursed under his breath, grabbing Amber by the arm and dragging her out. "Fine. You walk and I'll carry her." As Martin reached for Anna, Amber made her move. She stomped hard on his foot, her small shoe landing with surprising force. Martin howled in pain, releasing her arm, and Amber darted to Anna's side, pulling her sister to her feet. "Run!" Amber screamed, but Carl blocked their path before they could reach the warehouse door. "That's enough," Carl growled, his massive frame cutting off any escape. He grabbed the girls, his rough hands hoisting them like sacks of grain. "Let's get this over with." Henry Harper's car skidded to a halt outside the dockyard, the tires splashing through deep puddles. He stepped out into the storm, the rain soaking through his coat in seconds. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows glowing faintly from the light inside. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. Arthur stepped out of the second vehicle, his team of officers moving with practiced efficiency. "We go in quiet," Arthur said, his voice steady despite the storm. "We don't want to spook them. Stay behind me." Henry nodded, but his gaze was fixed on the warehouse. Amber and Anna were in there. Every second counted. Inside, Martin paced back and forth, his frustration mounting. The girls sat on the damp floor, their clothes soaked, their faces pale but defiant. "You're lucky I don't leave you here," Martin muttered, pointing a finger at Amber. "You think you're clever, don't you? You're just like her." Amber lifted her chin, her voice trembling but firm. "You're a bad man. Daddy will come." Martin laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Your daddy can't protect you forever." Anna's small hand crept toward her pocket, where she had tucked away the crumpled edge of a candy wrapper she'd found in the van. Her fingers worked quickly, tearing small pieces and dropping them one by one onto the floor, leaving a trail as Martin ranted. "You think I want to hurt you?" Martin continued, his voice rising. "No, I just want what's mine. And if Henry wants you back, he'll have to pay." Outside, Henry and Arthur crouched behind a stack of crates, the storm masking their approach. Arthur held up a hand, signaling for the officers to move into position. Henry's heart pounded in his ears, his every instinct screaming at him to charge in. But he knew better. He had to be smart. For the girls. Arthur tapped Henry's shoulder, nodding toward the warehouse entrance. "On three," he whispered. "Stay close." Inside, Martin's patience snapped. He grabbed Amber by the arm, hauling her to her feet. "Enough games," he snarled. "You'll—" A deafening crash interrupted him as the warehouse door burst open. Arthur and his team stormed in, their weapons drawn, their voices commanding. "Freeze! Hands in the air!" Martin spun around, his face twisting in fury. "No! This isn't—" Henry appeared behind Arthur, his eyes locking on the twins. "Amber! Anna! Daddy!" they screamed in unison, scrambling toward him as Martin released them in panic. But before they could reach him, Carl lunged forward, his arm swinging toward Anna. Amber, with a burst of courage, grabbed a rusted metal pipe from the floor and swung it at Carl's legs. The man stumbled, giving Anna the chance to escape. Henry caught them both in his arms, holding them tightly as the officers subdued Martin and Carl. The storm outside roared, its fury matching the chaos inside. But for Henry, the world narrowed to the warmth of his daughters in his embrace. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got you. You're safe." Amber buried her face in his chest, her small body trembling. "We left clues, Daddy," she said through her tears. "We knew you'd come." Henry pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes shining with pride. "You were so brave," he said, his voice thick. "Both of you." As the officers led Martin and his accomplices away, Henry carried Amber and Anna out into the storm. The rain washed over them, but for the first time in hours, Henry felt a profound sense of calm. They were safe. They were home. The Harper mansion stood still, bathed in the warm glow of the morning sun, its walls finally free of the tension that had gripped them for days. The storm had passed, but the echoes of that night still lingered in Henry Harper's mind. Amber and Anna sat at the breakfast table, their quiet giggles filling the kitchen as they spread jam onto thick slices of toast. The normalcy of the scene brought Henry a sense of relief, but also a gnawing thought. Things couldn't go back to the way they were. They had to move forward. Later that afternoon, Henry found himself in the attic, sifting through boxes he hadn't opened in years. Dust swirled in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the single window. He hadn't planned on coming up here, but something had drawn him, perhaps a desire to reconnect with the pieces of his life that had once brought him joy. As he opened one of Charlotte's old storage trunks, his breath caught. Inside were canvases, carefully wrapped in linen, each one bearing her signature brush strokes. Henry unwrapped one, revealing a vibrant depiction of a garden bathed in twilight. The colors seemed to dance, pulling him into the scene. Charlotte had always been able to capture the beauty of fleeting moments, and here, in her work, she was alive again. He pulled out canvas after canvas, each painting stirring bittersweet memories. There were landscapes of places they had traveled together, abstract pieces reflecting her playful imagination, and even portraits she had painted of him, Elizabeth, and their parents. Amber's voice startled him. "Daddy, what's that?" He turned to see both girls standing in the doorway, their wide eyes fixed on the colorful canvases surrounding him. "These," he said, his voice soft, "are your mother's paintings." Anna stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of a canvas. "Mommy painted all of these." Henry nodded, kneeling to their level. She loved painting. It was her way of telling stories without words. Amber's gaze lingered on a portrait of a young Elizabeth, her mischievous smile immortalized in soft strokes. "That's Aunt Elizabeth, isn't it?" "It is," Henry said, his voice tinged with sadness. "She and your mum were both artists in their own way. Your mum painted. And Elizabeth... she loved books. She always said they could take you anywhere if you let them." Amber and Anna exchanged a look before Amber spoke, her voice full of excitement. "Daddy, what if we make something with these? So everyone can see them and remember them both." Henry stared at his daughters, their faces alight with the kind of hope that had eluded him for years. A smile crept onto his face, and an idea began to form. Over the following months, the Harper mansion underwent a transformation. The grand but often silent halls became filled with the hum of workers and the chatter of plans being made. Henry decided to convert the East Wing into a library and community space, a place where the legacies of both Charlotte and Elizabeth could thrive. Amber and Anna threw themselves into the project with enthusiasm. They helped Henry choose which of Charlotte's paintings would adorn the walls, their keen eyes often picking the most striking pieces. Amber insisted on hanging the portrait of Elizabeth near the main entrance, saying, "She should greet everyone who comes in." The library's interior design took inspiration from Charlotte's paintings, soft hues of blue and green evoking calm, with bursts of vibrant yellows and oranges bringing warmth. Henry worked closely with local artisans to create shelves that seemed to flow like the waves in Charlotte's landscapes. The library's central space became a haven for readers, with cozy nooks and open areas for storytelling. Anna, with her knack for organizing, helped sort through Elizabeth's collection of books, many of which had been stored away in the attic. Together, they created a special section dedicated to Elizabeth's favorite authors and genres, complete with handwritten notes about her thoughts on the stories. The grand opening of the Harper Legacy Library drew a crowd from all over Boston. Families wandered through the halls, marveling at the paintings and discovering books tucked into hidden corners. Amber and Anna led children through storytelling sessions, their voices animated as they brought tales to life. As Henry watched his daughters guide a group of young readers toward the garden area, a space modeled after one of Charlotte's paintings, he felt an unfamiliar but welcome sensation: peace. The library was more than a tribute. It was a living, breathing extension of his family's history, a bridge between the past and the future. Later that evening, as the last visitors trickled out, Amber and Anna sat on the library steps, their faces glowing with pride. Henry joined them, pulling them into his arms. "You did something amazing today," he said. "Both of you. Your mother and aunt would be so proud." Amber leaned her head against his shoulder. "We couldn't have done it without you, Daddy." Anna nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "Mommy and Aunt Elizabeth would want people to feel happy here, like we do." Henry smiled, his heart full. For the first time in years, he felt whole. The storm that had once loomed over their lives had finally passed, leaving behind a clear sky filled with hope and the promise of new beginnings. Together, they sat beneath the stars, the library's warm light spilling out behind them. A beacon for those who sought solace, just as they once had. The grand opening of the Harper Legacy Library began with a clear and bright dawn, a stark contrast to the storms that had once plagued Henry Harper's life. The mansion, now a transformed beacon of art and literature, stood as a testament to resilience, love, and the enduring legacies of two remarkable women. The air buzzed with excitement as families, artists, and book lovers gathered, their chatter blending with the soft melodies of a string quartet playing in the garden. Amber and Anna stood at the main entrance, their eyes wide with wonder. They had dressed for the occasion in matching pale blue dresses, their hair tied with ribbons that fluttered in the breeze. Above them, a plaque read, "The Harper Legacy Library, a home for creativity and stories untold." Amber traced her fingers over the engraved letters. "Mommy and Aunt Elizabeth would like this, wouldn't they?" she inquired, casting a glance up at her father. "They would love it," Henry replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He adjusted Anna's ribbon, a soft smile playing on his lips. "And they'd be so proud of you two." The library was a masterpiece. Visitors marveled at the paintings lining the walls, each piece a window into Charlotte's world. Sunlit meadows, vibrant cityscapes, and serene oceans created a kaleidoscope of emotions, making the library feel alive with her presence. In one corner, a reading nook bathed in soft blues and greens, a tribute to Charlotte's favorite colors, offered a quiet refuge for visitors. Elizabeth's section was equally enchanting. Rows of shelves held her favorite books, from classic novels to obscure collections of poetry, each accompanied by handwritten notes she had left in the margins. A small plaque displayed one of her quotes, Books are the keys to lives we've never lived. Amber and Anna took pride in showing visitors around. They led children to the storytelling circle, where Amber recited fairy tales with dramatic flair, while Anna held up her drawings to illustrate the scenes. Laughter rang through the halls, a joyful echo that warmed Henry's heart. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, Henry took the stage in the main hall. As he stood beneath Charlotte's largest painting, a sweeping view of a forest at dawn, with light breaking through the trees like hope-piercing darkness, the crowd quieted, their attention drawn to him. He cleared his throat, glancing at Amber and Anna, who watched him with wide, encouraging smiles. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady. "This library is more than just a building filled with art and books. It's a celebration of the lives and legacies of two women who taught me what it means to love, to persevere, and to believe in the power of creativity." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "Charlotte, my wife, captured beauty in her paintings. The world was vivid and full of possibility to her. And my sister, Elizabeth, believed that every story has value, no matter how small or overlooked. Together, they shaped who I am, and through this library, their spirits will continue to inspire others." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd as Henry gestured toward Amber and Anna. But this library wouldn't exist without these two remarkable girls. Amber and Anna are my constant reminders that even in the darkest times, there is light. They've shown me courage, resilience, and a joy that's contagious. I hope this space brings others the same sense of wonder and hope they bring me every day. The applause was thunderous, and Henry stepped down from the stage to embrace his daughters. Amber whispered, "You did great, Daddy," while Anna nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. As the last visitors left, Amber and Anna stood at the entrance, waving goodbye to their new friends. The sun dipped low over Boston, casting the library in a warm, golden glow. The twins turned to Henry, who stood watching them from the steps. "Daddy," Amber said, her voice full of excitement, "can we do another storytelling session tomorrow? And maybe add more of Mommy's paintings to the kids' area?" Anna made the suggestion, her hand gripping the corner of her dress. Henry chuckled, pulling them both into a hug. "We'll do all that and more. This is just the beginning." The three of them stood together, gazing out at the city as the library's warm light spilled into the twilight. Inside, Charlotte's paintings and Elizabeth's books whispered their stories to those who would listen, while Amber and Anna's laughter echoed through the halls, a testament to a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of new stories waiting to be told. As the stars blinked into the night sky, Henry felt a deep sense of peace. They were safe. They were home. And together, they were building something lasting. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us, and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.